So what I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about some of the material that I teach in my class. My class is a communications class, and I follow what I would call a coaching model, which means that I have two TAs who are really outstanding, and they lean in and work with me very collaboratively to ensure that all the students in my class have an opportunity to practice all of the skills that we talk about. So what does that mean? It means that we talk through the best practices in areas like presentation skills, interpersonal communication, relating to managing conflicts and negotiations. And, sometimes we talk about interviewing. We talk about, I'm going to say good visual aid design, managing and responding to difficult questions, understanding your own style, your interpersonal style, and how that impacts your willingness and ability maybe to work collaboratively with others, and what are some adjustments you might make about it. So we talk about all of these elements of communication, and every class there's an opportunity for us to get into breakouts and practice the skills. So one of the things that I like to reinforce about communication is like a sport. That means that you not only know how to have to do it, like you'd have to know how to play tennis, or you'd have to know the elements of how to play baseball or soccer. You'd have to know those things. But in addition to knowing them cognitively, you also have to be able to do them. So there's a physical component of communicating. It's psychomotor. It means that you have to think about the right thing to do, and then you actually have to do it. That's why practicing communication skills is so critical, because our intentions aren't known. What's inside our head is not known. What is known to the people we interact with are our behaviors. And ideally, those behaviors to match our good intentions. And many times, not everyone has an awareness of how their behaviors are interpreted. And so that's where the practice comes into play, and where the importance of feedback comes into play. So practice and feedback are part and parcel with what I call the coaching model of the class that I teach. What I'd like to do today is take you through very, very quickly a cursory view of one of the communication skills that I consider to be so critical. It's the communication skill that is used the most. It's the communication skill that is taught the least. It is the communication skill that is often, considered to be not much of a communication skill at all, not much of a struggle, and something that maybe comes easily to everyone. And that, of course, is a misapprehension, I think, that in my experience, many people suffer from. And that is the communication skill of listening. So I want to talk you through the nuts and bolts of listening, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the skill of questioning. And then I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. So any questions that cross your mind, please feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat at any point. When I finish with my short, lecture part, which will be about 15 or 20 minutes or so, then you can ask questions not only through the chat, but you can also ask them if you want to, just raise your hand, or, signal that you'd like to have the floor, and then we can hear you via audio, and that is fine too. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the skill of listening. I have a few slides that I want to share. Okay. Okay. All right, so again, this is a short segment, abbreviated segment of some material that I teach in my class, or sometimes in the guest lectures I give in other classes. And again, I teach management communication, or what might be called leadership communication as well. The thing about leadership is that most leadership is about communication. And so we really get into the nuts and bolts of how you do that effectively. And I want to talk a little bit about listening. First off, I want to kind of sell you on listening, why it's an important skill to think about, the reasons that managers listen, or that leaders listen, or really anybody listens. Anybody who's in a relationship will listen. Then I want to talk through the skills of active listening. And in particular, I want to underscore that we're talking about a specific kind of listening here, and that is active listening, not passive listening. But I will go ahead and clarify that. And then finally, I want to talk about the impact that you have as a questioner. Part of listening can relate to the kind of questions that you ask to encourage the other person to speak. And I want to talk about the impact that you can have as a questioner. I think many of us don't realize how much influence we have as a questioner. So let's talk about why we should listen. There are a lot of reasons why we should listen. And again, we listen all the time. And I think many times we feel as though listening may be an endurance contest. Like, how long do I have to do this for before I get a chance to talk? And so I just want to underscore that listening is the most powerful way that you can build relationships. If you're looking to have a better relationship with somebody, then I'm going to tell you exactly how to do it, and that is to listen to them. And when I say listen, I mean listen non-judgmentally. Listen to truly gather information and hear somebody out. So it's a very powerful relationship building technique, and relationship building means that it's trust building, and trust building means that it extends into all sorts of other beneficial, circumstances, such as diffusing conflicts or working better in a negotiation, coaching someone in a better way, etc. Just lots of different reasons why the application is important. But for yourself, if there's a selfish reason to listen? Sometimes there are selfish reasons we do things. So what are the selfish reasons to listen? And there are a few. One is if you listen, and that is truly listen without interrupting and without judging, then it gives you a chance to consider new ideas. And I say that is a very important thing because often we get pretty wedded to what our ideas are, our opinions are. But if you listen effectively, without judgment and without interruption, then it gives you an opportunity to consider a different viewpoint or a different idea. And so from a selfish perspective, you learn something when you listen. It's a way of building self-awareness too. Because it encourages you to examine your own thoughts or your own processes. So listening is a way that we can build self-awareness. And for those of you, many of you probably know, and I will reinforce this, that one of the cornerstones of effective leadership is self-awareness. And so the listening is a great way to build self-awareness. It's also a way to analyze an audience. And analyzing an audience is one of the critical first steps to persuasion, to being an influencer. Understanding what the interests are of the person or people that you're talking to, what their goals are, how they make decisions, what they care about, how they feel. So by listening to somebody, you really can analyze an audience, that person as an audience, very effectively. It makes you a more persuasive person when it comes your time to talk. Then finally, most of us really like to be listened to. It's a really good feeling when somebody listens to us. And I would invite you to think about that for yourself. You probably have, one or two, or maybe three people, if you're very lucky, in your life that you trust to share your true opinions and beliefs with. And think of how much you treasure that moment when somebody is truly listening to you. So from the perspective of somebody who will trust you as a listener, that is a great credibility boost for you. So being an effective listener enhances your credibility. I expect that if you have a boss who listens to you, you're very, very fortunate, and you probably like talking to that person. So on the flip side, think that that's how others will view you. If they feel as though they can talk to you, that enhances your credibility with them as well. For others, what are some of the reasons that we may listen for others' sake? It's a respectful thing to do. I think we all know that. We probably were taught that when we were knee-high, that it is a signal of respect when we listen to somebody. It's a way of demonstrating your concern, that you care for somebody, your willingness to listen. And of course, that's why it's such a powerful relationship builder. Sometimes people need to be listened to that it helps them process or think through a challenge or a trouble that they may have. And so it's a way of assisting somebody. And then finally, what are the mutual gain reasons to listen? As I said before, it is the key relationship building skill. And if you want to have a better relationship, listen to that person. You will have a better relationship. It's a guarantee. It is a way for you to respond to people's questions. So you're able to, again, share information. For resolving disputes, any book you read about negotiation or managing conflict, any book you read about that is going to say that the cornerstone to make that process work is to be a good listener. So resolving disputes depend on effective listening. And then finally, a way to reach agreement. The gold standard for many disagreements is getting to a collaborative approach, a collaborative solution. And that is as solution where both parties feel as though they've gotten maybe the best they could get given the circumstances. And so it's a way to reach agreement. So I hope I've sold you on the reasons why listening is a very important communication skill to think about and one to practice and be good at. So I want to ask you for a little bit of self-reflection here, and I want you just to take a moment and think about this and answer this question for yourself. How do you listen? When you are listening to somebody, how much effort or energy do you put into it? Do you consider it an activity, or do you consider it as a waiting period until somebody else has finished talking and then it's your chance to talk? And I want to invite you to recognize that listening, again, is an active posture. It's an active stance. It's an active communication skill, and one that if you do it well, you will actually feel a little tired afterwards because it takes energy and it takes effort if you really are doing it effectively. And I'm going to invite you to think about a circumstance, not a passive listening like where you're listening to the radio, or maybe you're listening to somebody have a conversation on the other side of the room and you're not really putting any energy into that. I want you to think of the kind of listening that you would do if you were involved in a negotiation, if you were talking to somebody that you really cared about and cared about their life and their future, and they wanted to share something with you, if you're involved in some kind of a dispute or a conflict, and you really have to aim to solve it, I want you to think about that kind of listening, because that's the kind of listening that I want to focus on. And that's what I would call active listening. And we're going to talk through what the key skills are for active listening. And there are 3 buckets of skills that I want to talk about. This information appears in my book, which is called Guide to Interpersonal Communication, but also in a book by Robert Bolton called People Skills. And these are the 3 clusters of skills that are identified that correspond to being an effective listener. They're attending skills, encouraging skills, and reflecting skills. So let's talk through what these attending skills are. Attending skills are the look of listening. These are the physical indicators that you demonstrate to another person that signals to them you are listening. And it's important to have an awareness of these because it's all the other person has to go on. They can't read your mind. They have to trust the nonverbal signals that you send. So what are some of those signals? First off is a posture of involvement. A posture of involvement typically means that you square off and face the other person, right? It doesn't like this would be, I'd be giving you the cold shoulder if I was looking, the other way and pretended like I was listening to you. You'd know from my posture that I wasn't. So posture of involvement is squaring off and facing the other person, and often at times leaning in a little bit to demonstrate interest. Eye contact is very culturally based, but I will say in Western culture, in Western business culture, certainly, eye contact is a sign of listening. It's a signal that you are listening when you make eye contact with the speaker. And it doesn't mean it has to be pupil to pupil, intense, penetrating gaze, but it means that you will look at that person's face maybe 70 to 80% of the time. That is a signal that you are listening. And again, that the corollary to that is that if you are not making eye contact in that way, in Western culture, in Western business culture, the perception will be that you are not listening. And, you know, I can tell you that if, you know, when I talk to somebody who I think is not listening, I tend to limit what I share with them. And so, in other words, following these attending skills means that you get better information out of somebody because they read the signals that you are paying attention. Suitable environment means that you set up your space, your physical space, so that you're able to really focus and attend to the other person. You don't have interruptions or interlopers. You aren't looking at your phone or you're doing something else while you're listening. You really are fully attending to that person as a sign of interest and respect. So again, that's the look of listening, and it's the only thing the other person has to go on. And that's why it's important to pay attention to it and to get it right. Next are encouraging skills. Encouraging skills are the things you do to signal as you go along to the other person that you're paying attention. You encourage them to continue. A door opener is a signal that you're ready and willing to listen. It may be verbal, it may be nonverbal. It could be something as simple as, hey, what's going on with you? Or what's up? But you signal to the other person you're ready and willing to listen. A minimal encourager, I hope it's one that resonates with you as something that maybe you do. Some minimal encouragers are nonverbal, such as nodding when somebody is speaking, or maybe cocking your head out of curiosity. That could be a nonverbal minimal encourager. Vocalized minimal encourager may be uh-huh or Those are vocalized minimal encouragers. They signal that you're following along. Some minimal encouragers are verbal, and verbal minimal encouragers may be something like really or wow, or you don't say. So they're phrases that you interject, and they really aren't meant to do anything other than to signal that you're following along. You get it. For as obvious as this next one may seem, it isn't obvious to everyone, and that is that when you're listening, you should be quiet. It doesn't mean that you're sit there like a stone head, but you should be quiet and let the other person speak. The other person may speak at a different pace than you. They may have a slower pace than you, and that may feel uncomfortable to wait for that person to finish their thought or to find the right word or finish their sentence. But the fact is that you've got to be quiet and let that person continue. Being silent is an important encouraging skill. And again, it may, for some people, it may feel like a struggle, and yet it's a struggle that you have to go through and win. Infrequent questions. There are some questions that are okay to ask when you are listening. And the kind of questions that I would encourage you to ask would be open-ended questions that let the other person share information in the way they want to. Now, I'm going to talk more about this in just a moment, but open-ended questions often begin with the words such as what, or how, or tell me about, or talk to me about. Those are open-ended questions. In other words, they signal to the other person, share this information with me in any way you want to, as opposed to a closed question, which restricts the response of the person who's speaking. So a closed question is a question that can be answered with yes or no, or maybe with just a fact. Like, what time did you get there is a closed question, or did you have a good time is a closed question, because it can be answered with yes or no. Alternatively, tell me about what it was like when you got there. That's an open question. Or talk to me about what it felt like. That would be an open question. So those are the differences there. And again, I'll talk about that more in just a moment. And then finally, reflecting skills. Reflecting skills are really, paraphrasing is the reflecting skill. It's harder than it seems. We all probably learned paraphrasing when we were in grade school or junior high school, how to paraphrase a lengthier comment. And some of the lessons from back then are exactly what we're aiming for. A good paraphrase is shorter than the original comment. A good paraphrase balances facts and feelings. A good paraphrase is an effort to reflect back to the speaker. This is what I heard you say. Did I get it right? The reason that's so critical is that each and every one of us focus on different things. And when you paraphrase, you are saying to the other person, these are the things that you said that seem to me to be most important. Did I get it right? Are those the ones that really are most important? And so you paraphrase to check in. It's again a great signal of attentiveness and interest. A good paraphrase often begins with words such as, it seems that, or it sounds to me like, or what I'm hearing is. Those are ways to begin a paraphrase. There are lots of other ways. You don't even have to use those phrases. But the point being that you're looking to check in with the speaker. This is what I heard you say. Did I get it right? So those are the clusters of skills that go along with being an effective listener: attending, encouraging, reflecting. And I want to just spend one final moment talking about questions, and then we'll go ahead and get into a chance for you to ask some questions if you'd like to, or make some comments. And so for this, I want to reinforce that as a questioner, somebody who is asking questions, you have a lot of influence and a lot of power. And you encourage or discourage others from speaking by the kind of questions that you ask. So just to clarify what some of those questions are, I talked a little bit already about closed questions versus open questions. And a closed question is the one that's at the top here. Did you have a good time? That's a very pleasant, leading, closed question. Why is it leading? Because I've already indicated I'm looking for an answer to good time or not a good time. So I'm leading you with that question. And you can answer this question with a yes or no. That means that you don't have to say any more. I'm not inviting you to share any more information with that closed question. Versus an open question, what did you like? That means you can tell me as much as you want to. Or what thoughts do you have? That's an open question. You can share as much as you want to in any order that you want to in response to that open question. And typically open questions feel like red carpet questions. Again, you invite the other person to share what they want to, and that's why they feel like such gifts when they're asked, because it's typically a feeling of relaxation and respect that comes when people are asked open questions. Okay, secondly, the importance of verb choice. The verb that you choose in a question is going to guide the other person in terms of how they think about it or how they respond. So the comparisons here are, what might you do differently versus what can you do differently? So what might you do differently feels a little fanciful. Like, what might, oh, well, let's just be blue sky about it. What are some of the things you might do differently? Versus what can you do differently? That feels a lot more practical, right? Let's get down to the couple of steps that you can do differently. What should you do differently? Again, feels a little bit hypothetical. Versus what must you do differently? That feels like these things have got to be are essential. And so the verb choice is going to guide somebody in their response and their feelings as well. And then lastly, direct questions versus stage setting questions. Stage setting questions are so inviting, I think, for someone to respond to. So a direct question, the first one here, it says, what have you learned from this experience? Again, very powerful, open question, and invite somebody to share information in any way they want to. And that's again, a great question. But a stage setting question tries to put people into a moment where they imagine themselves in a different environment. And in putting themselves in that moment, it sometimes feels liberating for them to think about different things, or things differently rather. So this stage setting question is, imagine you're speaking to yourself 1 week ago today. You have the wisdom and insight that you have now. You have plenty of time to reflect. What might you consider saying to your less experienced self? So that's a stage setting question that invites you to get into a moment of thinking of you today talking to yourself 1 week ago. What would you say to that younger self of yours, that 1 week ago younger self? And that is, again, a stage setting question is a great way to begin, a brainstorming part of a meeting, or to invite someone to really relax and think about more openly, more liberally about other elements of their, their thoughts. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop share now, and I will be so happy to take any questions or comments that you have. I know we have a very international group here, and a lot of the interesting thing about communication, of course, is that a lot of communication patterns and practices are very different around the world, and certainly nonverbal patterns and practice are different as well. And so I'd be very happy to either take questions through the chat or hear questions. If you'd like to, raise your hand and make yourself known, then you can go ahead and ask those questions.
Thank you, Professor Baney. As some of you may notice, I promoted you to panelist. So if you feel comfortable, please feel free to turn your videos on. We'd love to see your lovely faces and engage with us in any way. But as Professor Baney mentioned, you can also put your questions in the chat. But yes, we have another half hour, so please feel free to ask whatever it is that you are thinking and any of your thoughts of her presentation.
One thing I will share with you, I mentioned eye contact patterns as a listener in Western culture. And I know that eye contact patterns are very different around the world. And of course, that makes it challenging for people who travel and interact in different cultures, because our eye contact patterns are often so reflexive that they're very hard to adapt and adjust. And so I want to reinforce that as I share those eye contact patterns, for Western culture, as a listener, we're looking for you to have, 75, 80% of the time, you should be looking at the person who's speaking to demonstrate interest and attentiveness. But I know that's not true in everywhere. So I would be very interested in hearing your comments as you compare those, that description. Well, if there are no questions, I'll go ahead and just share some of the other information regarding nonverbal communication that I talk about in my class, not specifically relating to listening, but I will say in terms of nonverbal communication relating to speaking. So public speaking is one of the pieces that I talk about a lot in my class, and some of the elements of presentation skills and public speaking that are very important to consider and very powerful are the nonverbal indicators that you share, that you demonstrate with your body language. So you demonstrate comfort and confidence through body language. And in fact, it's been determined by lots of different researchers and sociologists that your body language is always more powerful, more impactful, and more important than the words that you say. It doesn't mean that the words you say aren't important, but it means that your body language has to represent a strong foundation, a strong platform of credibility and confidence upon which your words will build. If the credibility and confidence doesn't come through your body language, then your words have less impact, and in fact, they may be doubted.
Does anyone have any questions? Please feel free to ask. Don't be shy. We're practicing eye language and communication and body language.
If I can ask, well, first of all, thank you so much for your time and presentation. And I am curious, I'm I'm from Colombia, and we do emphasize on the importance of eye contact and just like connecting with the other person. But I would be curious if you know, if you share other ways, like how does it work around the world?
Mhm. Thank you so much. Yeah, I've been to Colombia many times, Sarah. I taught at the Externado for many, many times in Bogota. So hello to you, and you know, I love your coffee. Anyway, I will, you know, I would say that you know, the eye contact patterns that you experience in your country are very similar to the ones in the United States or Western business culture. But my understanding, and feel free, any of you who are you know, dialing in or from an Asian culture or a Middle Eastern culture or in, one of the African nations, you know, please feel free to weigh in and help us out here. But just as an example, I had a student some years ago who was from Ghana, a country in Africa. And he said that if I were in his country, that the women there would demonstrate their respect for me by not making eye contact. So in other words, to show that they respected me, they would look down. And I thought that was a very interesting and important detail, because I would interpret that as disrespectful. That's how I would see it. But he is saying it would be very respectful. So there's an example of an eye contact that would, you know, doesn't translate across culture without the full awareness of it. And again, there are, and I think you know, I am told that in some Middle Eastern cultures and some Asian cultures, that direct eye contact is a signal of, it may be seen as aggressive, and it may not have that same kind of the message that we would interpret, or that, you know, Western culture, Western business culture would interpret. And again, I defer to anybody who's logging in from an Asian or Middle Eastern culture to give us further insight or to clarify that. Thank you, Sarah.
If I can everyone hear me? Yeah, I would actually echo that, the insight that one of the person from Ghana, the insight that he offered. I grew up in Nairobi, and in traditional communities, that's definitely the case. Whereas, you know, women in households who maybe serve more domestic roles, or they're not in the workforce, it is considered rude, especially if you, yes, are placed in a more rural area, if that's where you reside. And also coming from like a Korean perspective, I would say even in modern work environments, I think it's slowly shifting, but just with so much respect attached to the idea of age, for example, it can be disrespectful to, you know, make direct eye contact, especially if you're younger and you're, you know, discussing something with someone who is much more senior to you in the workforce. So your insights on eye communication, body language are very interesting, because it's intriguing to compare different cultural perspectives and on how this can be approached in a professional setting. And thank you so much for sharing today.
Oh, well, thank you. And thanks for that clarification and reinforcement. You know, and I will also, you know, say again that eye contact patterns, nonverbal patterns, are typically so ingrained in us. It's how we move through the world. And so learning them for different cultures and different circumstances is really, it's hard to do. It takes a lot of mental energy into, again, something that's typically reflexive. Now we have to actually be conscious about it. And so, you know, all of us, as we travel around the world and interact in different cultures, have to be mindful of being sensitive to the differences, and then being, you know, being able to manage ourselves so that we don't unknowingly offend others. Thank you so much.
Professor Baney, we have a few questions in the chat. One of them coming from Diana. Thank you, Diana, for your question. Do you have any insight on how we can use body language through webinars?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. You know, a lot of the same rules apply. A lot of the same guidelines apply. That means that, you know, to signal attentiveness and respect, you still want to square off and face the camera. I work with a lot of faculty members at Columbia who have two screens. They have one screen and then another one. And so they seem to do their whole lecture like this. And, you know, you could just imagine how how it, it seems that they're not paying attention to people by doing that. So square off and face the screen. One of the curiosities about technology right now is that, like, for example, right now I'm looking at all of you and I'm so happy to see all of you, but it probably looks like I'm looking down a little bit. My camera is here, it's at the top of my screen. So now I'm looking at a green dot, but it probably looks like I'm looking at you, right? And that probably feels a little better. It doesn't feel good to me, but it probably feels a little bit more like I'm connecting with you in the way that a newscaster might connect to the camera. And so that's, that's a bit of a challenge and one to be aware of, that we don't necessarily are able to connect in the same way. I will say, I would like to reinforce this, that we're all missing human connection, I think, in this, Zoom reality. And one of the elements of human connection is just kind of a warm handshake or a warm hello. And we don't get that anymore. And so I would like to reinforce it. When you interact with people via Zoom, you want to give them a little bit of that warm handshake. And the warm handshake that we can do in a, we're two-dimensional now, but in real life, when we're in person, we're three-dimensional. So what can we do? And that is to really be aware of the facing the camera, looking, making eye contact, and the minimal encouragers that we talked about as a listener, very important to do, because we're just not getting enough connection with others. And so every little thing we do feels better, every small thing.
Thank you. I see Mateo has his hand raised. Mateo?
Yes, hi. Greetings from Colombia also.
Hi, Mateo.
Hi. Thank you very much for organizing this. I have a question regarding the participation during meetings. I have one of the most challenging aspects for me is to participate in meetings with a lot of people, well, in the pre-COVID world. Do you have any tips for using this kind of skills when facing these scenarios with a lot of people in a meeting?
Yes, so I do one full session of my class on managing meetings, and so there's many things to say about it. And managing a meeting is as complex as managing a presentation. So first I would say that the length of time that you might put into putting together a presentation, most of us put a great deal of time in doing presentations, and I would invite you to think about putting the same amount of time into planning, managing a meeting. But that being said, when you are in a meeting, one of the critical things about managing a meeting is facilitating the contributions of others. So when you facilitate the contributions of others, you have to be an effective listener and all the things we talked about, and also an effective paraphraser, so that you can summarize what someone has said and then transition to connect it to the next thing, whether that's going to be a connection to another person's comment or another item on the agenda. So that is being a good listener, paraphrasing with the intention that it's not just you checking in, it's you're paraphrasing it to summarize and transition to the next item on the agenda. So paraphrasing is a really powerful skill, because it can do so many things for you. It can amplify somebody's comments, it can reinforce, it signals respect, again, signals that you're hearing, and also, again, serves as a transitional tool. Thank you, Mateo.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat from Amalia. I think your hand is also raised. For people with low self-esteem, stage fright, and severe anxiety, do you have any tips to offer?
Oh, Amalia, I'm so glad you asked that question. Absolutely. I do a full class session on managing speech anxiety as well, because it is so common. And so first thing I want to say to you is you're very normal. If you feel nervous or anxious before you do any kind of public speaking, it is just the most normal thing in the world. And so don't beat yourself up about it. Everybody feels it. The twist with speech anxiety is that many of the nervous symptoms that we feel are not visible to the audience. Now, that's not true for all nervous symptoms, but many are not visible. So what does that mean? It means that most everybody, like 99.99% of people, are feeling nervous or anxious, but we just can't tell because their nervous symptoms are not visible. And a couple of quick examples I'll give you are a pounding heart, not visible. Butterflies in your stomach, not visible. Sweaty palms, can't see them, right? All these things, just not visible to the audience. If you are for somebody who's short of breath in some way that's not detectable, if it is you're a lot short of breath, then it could be detectable because your vocal volume may diminish. So that's the first thing I would say, is just recognize it's a really common problem and most nervous symptoms are not visible. And the second thing I would say is, before you do a presentation, the best thing you can do for yourself is to rehearse out loud ahead of time. So when I say rehearse out loud, I literally mean like you're an actor on the stage, you stand up and you say your presentation out loud ahead of time as a rehearsal, part of the rehearsal process. Why is this important? Because, as I said before, communicating is a physical activity. It isn't just up here. It is up here, but it's a lot more than that. You actually have to do it. So you want to practice all the different parts of communicating in real time. You're going to have the word choices. You're going to look around the room as though you're looking at in your rehearsal as though there are people there. You're going to practice the physicality, your gestures, your posture, everything, like you're an actor on the stage. That is one of the best things you can do for yourself to manage speech anxiety. Because then when you get into the moment of doing the actual presentation, you will have had an actual rehearsal. And a little bit of muscle memory will kick in for you. So you'll be able to take advantage of that muscle memory.
Thanks,
Thank
Professor
you.
Baney.
Thank
I
you.
can definitely attest to that. I always practice my my presentations before. I look like a maniac because I'm in the mirror, but I think it helps.
Yeah, and again, some people do it in the mirror. Some people, now that we all have, recording devices, I would say set your phone up or your iPad up and record yourself and then watch. I know for many of you, like, oh God, I'd rather die 1,000 deaths, but watch and see what you like about what you're doing. I think you'll find you're doing a lot of things really well. Mm-hmm. And then you may say, oh, well, there's 1 or 2 things I could do differently. And you'll probably figure out that they aren't that hard to do them differently. So it's a great confidence boost to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We have another question that is piggybacking off of the comment you made about paraphrasing. Could paraphrasing create a negative environment and specific to women being dismissed within a male-dominated labor field?
I'm very pro paraphrasing, so I'm not sure. I might ask you to clarify a little bit what you mean, but I will say this about paraphrasing. One of the great gifts of paraphrasing is that you paraphrase for your own purposes by shifting gears with the paraphrase, by changing directions with a paraphrase. So for example, let's say that somebody were to ask me a very mean question with inflammatory language, such as, I'll just come up with something mean or horrible somebody might say to me. And that is, let's say, what if they said, how can we be sure that the funds that we're sending to your organization aren't being spent on on jaunts and restaurants and things that don't relate to the purposes that we're sending it to? You can't be trusted, right? Let's say they said that to me. I wouldn't want to, in my response, repeat that negative language, because by repeating it, I would amplify it. So in my paraphrase of that question, I may say something like, I share your concerns that all the money, all the contributions made to this organization are used effectively. So my paraphrase would, in an attempt to capture the essence of the question, but not repeat the negative language. By so doing, I can shift the tone. Do you hear what I mean by that? Right. So that's, I'm not sure I've answered your question really, Nina, but I'd like to know more about what your, what your thoughts are about the dismissiveness, because that's an important thing for, for all of us to have an awareness of and to address. So please share more if you're comfortable.
Yeah, so just because I'm a sociology and labor major, and we discuss a lot about gender issues within the workplace and how that kind of creates a hostile environment for women in male-dominated fields like, STEM, like when they get into engineer programs or engineer jobs, women are less likely to be heard within the conference rooms or within the workplace. And when they talk to their employers who are like male supervisors, usually they tend to be dismissed or ignored, or just pretty much like, maybe they have an idea about something and they the men kind of paraphrase and they repeat the idea, and then they kind of sell it off as their own. So that's what I'm kind of talking about, how like there's a huge gender bias within the workplace.
Yeah, and now I understand. Yes, thank you, Nina. So yeah, I have heard that many times, that they that a woman's comment may not be heard until it's kind of amplified by a male comment, and that they kind of co-opt that comment. So I understand that, and that, I mean, that is of course an unfair practice. And I know that during the Obama administration, you may have heard that the women in his cabinet, in his cabinet of advisors, they had a little pact. Tell me if you've heard this, where they chose to amplify, the women chose to amplify one another's comments. And so one woman would say something, and then another woman would say it again and say, like, I really liked what Nina said, and she said, this and this and such and so. So in other words, they would say it again and attribute it to the original woman who made the comment. And because they recognize exactly what you're talking about, Nina, that a lot of women's comments weren't being heard. And so again, they made this pact to amplify.
Yeah, I think that was really amazing.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
We have another question in the chat from Jingying. Thank you, Jingying. Could I learn more about how to shift the tone?
Right. Well, thank you. Yeah, there are, so many ways that we may shift the tone of a conversation. And all of it really stems from self-awareness and self-control. And so having an awareness of what your reflexive patterns and practices are is a really powerful thing. And to have awareness of your reflexive patterns and practices, you really just have to start to pay attention to the things you say and the things you do. So listen for, when somebody else speaks, what do you do? Or in other words, they have the floor. What do you do while they have the floor? Not what should you do, but what do you actually do? And when you respond to somebody else, what kinds of things do you typically say? We often have kind of go-to reflexes where either maybe we add to it, maybe we praise them, maybe we criticize, maybe we give advice, maybe we make a joke. I mean, we all have kind of interpersonal patterns. So I would say start with learning what your interpersonal patterns are, because only in having an awareness of our interpersonal patterns can we start to manage those interpersonal patterns, right? We can't manage what we don't acknowledge. So we have to first acknowledge it. And then go forward in thinking about when you respond, right? Now that you know what you typically do, when you respond, how can you respond differently in an effort to change the tone, to change the atmosphere? Because we have a lot of influence and a lot of power in these small, I'm going to say minor, micro reflexive ways. And so, as an example, I gave the example of not repeating negative language. That could be maybe an effort that you make where you say, if somebody uses an inflammatory word, one of my, efforts is going to be to choose a different way of saying something so that I don't repeat that negative language. Because the language, you can't control what comes out of somebody else's mouth. We can't, we'd love to, but we can't. We can only control what comes out of our mouth. And in repeating negative language, we amplify it. So again, one very small, it seems small, but it's actually huge. But you just begin to say, I will choose to recast and reframe the language or the descriptions that come my way that I don't agree with. And I won't, I will choose different language. And in choosing different language, I will paint a different picture.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one last question. If anyone has any burning questions you want to ask. I guess there are no more questions. Professor Baney, we have one question.
Rather than a question, is more of an add-on to what Sydney has said earlier on. I was thinking of adding my perspective as well as a Southeast Asian from Malaysia, and what we were taught from young is that we should always keep our heads high and to always respect the elders. So if someone who is older is on the table and they're speaking, then we should not interrupt until they are done, and then only then we add our own perspective. And there is also what we would call like a old-fashioned way of thinking in Asia, where people still think that male is the superior sex and women should just do what they say. I do find it saddening to experience that myself, and and personally, I know it's going to take a long time for people to change their own way of thinking, but if only society is more accepting of women as leaders, then perhaps the world we are living in could have been way better than how it is now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Emily. I couldn't agree more. And it really does start, by one step at a time. And so, awareness of those kinds of differences is a really powerful start. And inch by inch, right? Inch by inch, we go far. So I would agree that it begins with awareness, but it also begins with our taking small steps ourselves and making little changes that can be very powerful. Thank you.
All right, I think we only have a few minutes left. So Professor Baney, thank you so much.
Thank you.
If folks want to learn more about the work that you do, the course that you teach, and the executive MPA program, what else can they do besides going to the website? Is there anything else that they can do to remain connected?
Oh, well, feel free to, find me on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to be connected to you in that way. And then also, you feel free to find my book on Amazon. You can buy a used copy for a very small amount of money. So that's another thing. And then also, I certainly hope that you will join us at SIPA in New York when the pandemic is over and all things are back to the way they had been and the way they will be again, I'm sure.
Awesome, thank you. I put the link to your book in our chat, as well as the page to the MPA program, so please feel free to check that out. Again, thank you so much for your talk today, and thank you all for those of you who joined. We hope you continue to stay connected with us, continue to stay safe. Again, good evening, good morning, wherever you're coming from. Thank you so much. Bye. Happy Friday.
Thank you. Bye.